Somewhere beneath your feet right now, a civilization is running. It has been running for longer than flowers have existed, longer than mountains have held their current shape, and it operates without a president, without a plan, without a single individual who understands what the whole is doing. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what follows will permanently change the way you look at the ground you walk on. Here is the open question that will haunt you until the final seconds of this video. If something weighing less than 2 grains of sugar can lift 50 times its own body weight, build underground skyscrapers, wage wars, grow food, take slaves, practice medicine, and outlive the dinosaurs, what exactly does that say about us? 20 quadrillion. That is the number of ants currently alive on Earth. Written out, it is a 20 followed by 15 zeros. A 2022 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, drawing on nearly 500 field surveys from every continent, arrived at that figure and immediately noted it was likely a conservative estimate. To feel the weight of that number, if every ant were a grain of sand, you could bury an entire country several meters deep and still have sand left over. But the number alone is not what stops you cold. It is the mass. The combined dry biomass of all ants on this planet amounts to roughly 12 million tons of carbon, more than every wild bird on Earth, more than every wild mammal, every elephant, every whale, every wolf, every eagle, every sparrow, all of them together, still lighter than the ants. They represent approximately 20% of humanity's own biomass. We call ourselves the dominant species. The ants appear unconcerned by this claim. Science has catalogued more than 17,000 species. Estimates suggest the real number could reach 22,000, with new species described every year. They inhabit every continent except Antarctica. They thrive in tropical rainforests and open deserts, on mountain slopes 4 kilometers above sea level and inside the foundations of apartment buildings. The oldest known ant fossil is 113 million years old. It was found embedded in limestone in northeastern Brazil and formally described in 2025. The species, named Vulcanidris cretensis, belonged to an extinct subfamily known as hell ants, and its jaws did not move sideways like modern ants. They moved vertically, like scythes, impaling prey onto a spike on the forehead. These creatures walked the same ground as Tyrannosaurus rex. The dinosaurs are gone. The ants are not. Ants descended from wasps, not as metaphor, not as simplification. Genetic and fossil evidence places their divergence from a wasp ancestor somewhere between 168 and 120 million years ago. The critical innovation was a small gland above the hind legs called the metapleural gland, which secretes antibacterial compounds. Without it, crowded underground colonies would have been wiped out by infection within generations. That one gland made everything else possible. A typical ant weighs between 1 and 5 milligrams. That is roughly equivalent to a couple of granules of table sugar. But the range across species is staggering, from the 1 milligram pharaoh ant worker to the bullet ant of South America, which reaches 90 milligrams. The difference in scale is like comparing a hamster to a large dog, and the largest living ant, Dinoponera gigantea from South America, reaches 3 to 4 centimeters in body length, roughly the length of your little finger. At the other extreme, ants of the genus Caerbara measure just 1 millimeter. 30 of them would fit on a single grain of rice. Ant anatomy is a masterwork of engineering. 6 legs, 2 compound eyes made of hundreds of individual lenses, 3 simple light-sensing organs on top of the head, and 400 distinct olfactory receptors, more than any other insect. A fruit fly has 61, a mosquito has around 150, a honeybee has 174. The ant perceives its world primarily through smell, and it does so with a chemical vocabulary of extraordinary complexity. Each ant also carries 2 stomachs, one for personal nutrition. The second, called the social stomach or crop, carries liquid food to be shared. The exchange is mouth to mouth, a process called trophallaxis. Through it, workers feed the queen, the larvae, and each other. A single ant is functionally a walking distribution node in a living supply chain. The body itself is encased in an exoskeleton of chitin, a rigid external shell to which all muscles attach from the inside. No internal bones means no wasted structural weight. More room for muscle. Imagine replacing your skeleton with a lightweight suit of armor and filling every freed up cavity with raw muscular tissue. That is the basic architecture of an ant. And then there are the mandibles, upper jaws that serve simultaneously as weapon, tool, shovel, scissors, and hand. With the same set of jaws, a single ant can sever the head of an enemy soldier and moments later carry an egg across the nest without cracking it. Precision and brutality housed in the same instrument. Now we reach the fact that sent most of you here. An ant can carry a load 50 times its own body weight. That is the standard figure. But in 2010, researchers photographed an Asian weaver ant worker holding a mass 100 times its own body weight. Scale that to a human being of 80 kilograms, and you are talking about lifting 4 to 5 metric tons overhead at full arm extension. The world weightlifting record, set by Soviet athlete Leonid Taranenko, stands at 266 kilograms. The ant, proportionally, beats it by a factor of dozens. The physics are not magic. Relative muscular strength scales inversely with body size. As an organism shrinks, its mass decreases faster than the cross-section of its muscles. Smaller creatures spend less energy simply holding themselves up. Combine that with an exoskeleton that anchors muscles more efficiently than bone, and you have a structural arrangement that makes extreme strength biomechanically logical. Research from the Ural Institute of Plant and Animal Ecology documented ants carrying loads 14 to 15 times their body weight in sustained transport. A 10 milligram ant carrying 150 milligrams. For a human to replicate this, they would need to carry a log weighing roughly 1.5 metric tons. But here is the detail that genuinely unsettled me. When two ants work together on a load, their combined output is not the sum of their individual efforts. It is nearly 3 times the output of either one alone. One ant generates approximately 24 ergs per second. Two ants together generate 63, not 48, 63. Scientists do not yet fully understand the mechanism behind this amplification. Something in the act of coordination itself generates additional force. Cooperation for the ant is not merely social, it is physically generative. And yet the ant is not even the strongest insect. The dung beetle can move loads 850 times its own mass. What makes the ant remarkable is not a single record, but relentless, daily, lifelong repetition of extraordinary effort. Thousands of loads. No rest days. No complaints. Ants do not sleep in the way we understand sleep. They rest in micro-episodes 1 to 2 minutes at a time, up to 250 times per day. Total rest for a worker amounts to 4 to 5 hours, distributed across hundreds of brief pauses. Queens rest longer, up to 9 hours. People who keep ant colonies at home have noted that upon waking, ants stretch their legs outward and open their mandibles wide. It looks precisely like a yawn. An ant colony is not a group of individuals. It is a superorganism, a term coined by American entomologist William Morton Wheeler in 1911. A single ant in isolation cannot survive. It lacks the capacity to perform all necessary functions. The colony as a whole is the organism. Workers are its cells. There are foragers, builders, nurses, soldiers, and a queen whose sole function is reproduction. None is complete alone. Together, they constitute something that is alive in a way that transcends any individual member, and that colony has no leader. The queen does not issue commands. She lays eggs. Decisions propagate through the system via chemical signals, pheromones that carry information about food, danger, colony identity, and emotional state, if we can use that word. This is what researchers call swarm intelligence, simple rules followed by millions of individuals producing collectively solutions that no single member could conceive. The colony finds food, navigates crises, chooses nest sites, organizes labor, all without a central processor. Distributed cognition on a massive scale. Each ant carries on its body a chemical signature composed of 40 to 50 distinct compounds. From this signature alone, another ant can determine in an instant whether a stranger belongs to the same colony, what role it performs, and its current physiological state. Identity, rank, and emotional status expressed as chemistry. And each colony carries its own unique chemical fingerprint, like a molecular family crest. Two nests of the same species will smell differently. No two colonies share the same code. When a scout locates food, it returns to the nest trailing a pheromone path. Others follow. If food remains, they reinforce the trail. If the source runs out, no one refreshes it, and the trail evaporates. The colony automatically concentrates effort where resources are greatest, without maps, without meetings, without memory stored in any single brain. This principle was formalized in 1992 by Italian researcher Marco Dorigo as the ant colony optimization algorithm, a method of solving complex routing and logistics problems. It is used today in shipping networks, telecommunications infrastructure, and industrial scheduling. Algorithms running supply chains across the modern world were inspired by ants. Most people using these systems have no idea. Beyond pheromones, ants communicate through touch, through antennal contact, and through vibration. Some species drum their abdomens against the ground, transmitting signals through the soil. Others possess a stridulation organ, a microscopic ridged surface that produces sound when one body segment scrapes against another, a biological instrument built into the architecture of the body itself. Russian researchers at Novosibirsk State University, using methods drawn from information theory, measured the time ants spent transmitting messages of varying complexity. They discovered that scout ants convey precise route information to foragers and that transmission time increases proportionally with route complexity. This is not a simple follow me signal. It is the transmission of abstract spatial instruction. When I first read this, I went back and reread it twice. Ants describe routes, not in words but in structured information. Ants also change professions as they age. The youngest workers start as nurses, tending eggs and larvae deep in the nest. As they mature, they take on construction and maintenance. The oldest and most experienced become foragers, venturing outside to gather resources. Foraging is the most dangerous role. Predators, weather, rival colonies. So it is assigned to those who have already lived most of their lives. The logic is ruthless. The efficiency is absolute. Now consider what determines an ant's caste in the first place. Genetically, all female larvae begin identical. What differentiates a future queen from a future worker is diet. Larvae fed more and better develop into queens, the others become workers. The workers themselves control this allocation, deciding how much food each larva receives. The workers determine who becomes royalty, not the queen, the workers. Sex itself is controlled through a mechanism called haplodiploidy. Fertilized eggs become females, either workers or queens. Unfertilized eggs become males. This means the queen determines the sex of her offspring by deciding which eggs to fertilize. She stores sperm from her single mating flight for her entire life, sometimes decades, spending it as needed like a carefully managed resource. The mating flight itself is one of the most dramatic events in the ant year. On warm, humid days following rain, thousands of winged males and females pour simultaneously from nests across a region, rising into the air to mate, often in flight. After mating, the fertilized females descend, bite off their own wings, and search for a place to found a new colony. The wings are useless underground, just impediments to digging. New life begins with an act of self-amputation. The founding queen then seals herself in a chamber, lays her first clutch of eggs, and feeds the initial larvae on trophic eggs, unfertilized eggs produced specifically as food. She is consuming potential offspring to sustain actual offspring. When the first workers emerge, they take over all foraging. The queen never leaves the nest again. Some ant species reproduce without mating at all. Females of certain cataglyphis species produce offspring through parthenogenesis, clones of the mother, every member female. No males required. An entirely self-perpetuating society. But none of this is the ability I promised you at the beginning. Leafcutter ants of South America do not eat leaves. Their digestive systems cannot process plant fiber. Instead, they cut vegetation with powerful mandibles, carry the fragments underground, and use them as substrate to cultivate fungus. The fungus is what they eat. Leafcutters developed agriculture 50 million years before the first human planted a seed. The fungal species they grow, Leucoagaricus gonguliforus, exists nowhere on Earth except inside leafcutter nests. It is fully domesticated. The ants maintain ideal humidity, temperature, and ventilation. They remove competing molds. The fungus, in response, produces specialized nutrient clusters called gongulidia that the ants harvest like a crop. This is not a metaphor for farming. It is farming. When a young leafcutter queen leaves to found a new colony, workers place a fragment of fungal culture inside a specialized pouch in her mouth. She carries it like a seed. Without it, the new colony cannot survive. Leafcutters have been doing this for 50 million years, but the fungal garden has an enemy, a parasitic mold that specifically targets the cultivated species. and the ants found a solution that predates modern pharmacology by tens of millions of years. On their bodies live bacteria called actinomycetes that produce an antibiotic targeting precisely this parasite. The ants carry these bacteria deliberately, passing them down through generations. Ant, fungus, bacterium. A triple symbiosis in which each depends on the other two. A pharmaceutical supply chain evolved before the concept of disease was ever named. Beyond farming, many ant species practice livestock management. They tend aphids, stroking them with their antennae to stimulate the release of honeydew, a sugary secretion the ants collect and consume. In return, they protect the aphids from predators, carry them to fresh feeding sites, and shelter them from rain. This is not metaphorical herding, it is herding. Some species also maintain underground chambers housing scale insects, farming them for their secretions, while harvester ants store seeds in subterranean granaries, even chewing off the germination point to prevent sprouting. Collection, processing, storage, a supply chain. The nests themselves are feats of engineering that dwarf most human construction relative to the builder's scale. Leafcutter colonies dig chambers down to 8 meters below the surface, a 3-story building in reverse. Hundreds of rooms serve distinct functions. Nurseries for eggs, chambers for larvae, chambers for pupae, fungal gardens, granaries, refuse dumps, and what function only as cemeteries. Ventilation shafts maintain airflow, drainage channels redirect water, underground cities with functional infrastructure built without blueprints. Weaver ants of the genus Oecophila construct nests from living leaves. Workers grasp the edges of leaves with their jaws and legs, pulling them together. Then other workers carry larvae to the seam and use them as living glue dispensers, pressing the silk-producing larvae along the join. They sew their home from leaves using their own children as the thread. It sounds disturbing. The result is architecturally sound. Fire ants, when flooding threatens, assemble into living rafts. Thousands of individuals locked together, forming a buoyant platform capable of floating for weeks. The queen and larvae are positioned at the center. Workers on the bottom layer, in contact with water, rotate out continuously. No one assigns shifts. It organizes itself through chemical signals and behavioral rules too simple to be called intelligence and too effective to be called anything else. Army ants build bridges from their own bodies. When a column encounters a gap, leading ants interlock, forming a living span across which the rest of the colony passes. They calculate the optimal bridge length and width, maintain it for the duration of the crossing, then dismantle it when the flow subsides. No engineer, no measurement, no plan. The collective intelligence that produces these behaviors emerges from a system that has no center. A single ant brain contains approximately 250,000 neurons. A human brain contains 86 billion. But a colony of 1 million ants collectively operates 250 billion neurons in coordinated chemically linked activity. More aggregate neural processing than any individual animal on Earth. Not unified in a single skull, but connected through an invisible web of chemical signals, vibrations, and touch, a distributed biological internet. Researchers at Rockefeller University discovered that Harpagnathos sultator ants can physically change social roles. When a queen dies, workers engage in a tournament of ritualized combat. Winners undergo actual physiological transformation. Their ovaries enlarge, their body chemistry alters, and they begin laying eggs. A worker becomes a queen. Not promoted, biologically transformed. As if a private soldier, upon losing her commanding officer, physically became a general at the cellular level. Ants wage war. Real, sustained, lethal conflict. Argentine ants in California formed a super colony stretching hundreds of kilometers, engaged in permanent warfare with neighboring super colonies. The front lines pass through suburban backyards. Casualties number in the millions annually. The colony expands regardless. Polyergus ants are slavers. They raid neighboring colonies, steal pupae, and bring them back. The workers that emerge accept their captors as family and labor on their behalf. The Polyergus themselves have so thoroughly specialized in raiding that they can no longer feed themselves, build, or tend to their own offspring. Their slaves do everything. Without captive workers, the raiders die within days. Evolution produced an organism incapable of sustaining itself, entirely dependent on the labor of other species. Absolute dependency achieved through conquest. And now, the ability I promised at the start. the one I said I had to verify 3 times. A parasitic fungus called Ophiocordyceps unilateralis turns ants into zombies, not as metaphor, as biological reality. Fungal spores enter through the ant's respiratory openings. The fungus grows throughout the body, wrapping every organ in cellular tissue, but it does not touch the brain. It controls behavior without touching the brain. The infected ant abandons its colony, climbs vegetation, finds a leaf at a specific height with specific humidity, locks its mandibles into the leaf's central vein, and dies. Days later, a fruiting body erupts from the back of the ant's head, twice the length of the ant's body, and releases spores onto the ants below. The ant is not the victim. The ant is the launch platform. David Hughes of Penn State University assembled an international research team to study this phenomenon. The findings are published in peer-reviewed journals. Ian Will at the University of Central Florida demonstrated in 2020 that the fungus disrupts the ant's circadian rhythms, its olfactory system, and its neurotransmitter signaling without ever penetrating the blood-brain barrier. It hacks the operating system without touching the processor, but ants are not defenseless against this. If a colony detects an infected individual, healthy workers carry it far from the nest, to a kind of quarantine. Some species can identify infection in its early stages before the fungus takes behavioral control. Collective immunity, practiced by animals that have never heard the phrase. And when ants are sick for reasons they can address themselves, they self-medicate. Research published in the journal Evolution showed that Formica fusca ants infected with a pathogen actively seek out food containing elevated levels of hydrogen peroxide, a natural antiseptic. Healthy ants avoid it. Infected ants search for it. They are treating themselves. The scale of ant danger is routinely underestimated. In Tasmania, blackjack ants kill more people each year than venomous spiders, wasps, snakes, and sharks combined. Their venom triggers anaphylactic shock in 3% of those stung. 3% seems small until a nest sits beside a walking path. The red imported fire ant, Solenopsis invicta, has spread from South America across warm regions worldwide, injecting a venom called solenopsin that causes intense pain, chemical burns, and in mass attacks involving hundreds of simultaneous stings, potentially fatal systemic reactions. A single species has generated over 3,000 scientific papers and approximately 100 doctoral dissertations. The bullet ant of South America received the highest rating on the Schmidt Pain Index, a classification system developed by entomologist Justin Schmidt, who systematically experienced and evaluated insect stings. The bullet ant's sting rates 4+. Nothing in the insect world is more painful. Survivors describe it as comparable to a gunshot wound. The pain lasts up to 24 hours. The venom reservoir inside the ant is nearly 2 millimeters long. For a creature of that size, this is artillery. The Sateremawe people of Brazil incorporate bullet ants into male initiation. Dozens of live ants are woven into gloves, stingers facing inward. An adolescent must wear the gloves for 10 minutes. Afterward, paralysis and loss of sensation in the hands last for days. The ritual is performed multiple times. Deaths have been recorded. This is not legend, it is documented ethnographic practice. Army ants, alternatively known as driver ants, build no permanent home. Millions of blind, aggressive individuals move as a single front, consuming everything that cannot escape. Insects, larvae, snakes, rodents. The swarm can extend 100 meters in width. In parts of Africa, when a column approaches, people leave their homes. They know to return later rather than remain. Desert ants of the species Cataglyphis fortis possess an internal pedometer. They count their own footsteps to calculate distance traveled. When researchers fitted them with artificial stilts that lengthened their stride, they overshot the nest. When researchers shortened their legs, they stopped short. They are literally counting each step. They navigate home using this step counter in combination with a solar compass calibrated to polarized light, which allows them to determine the sun's position even through cloud cover. 2 independent navigation instruments operating simultaneously housed in an organism that weighs 1 milligram. The silver ant of the Sahara, Cataglyphis bombicina, is among the most heat-tolerant land animals on Earth. It emerges to forage when sand surface temperatures reach 70 degrees Celsius. Its body is covered in microscopic silver hairs that reflect sunlight and thermal radiation. It moves so rapidly its legs contact the sand for minimum time with each stride. It is running across a frying pan, and it is built for exactly that, Trapjaw ants possess the fastest appendages in the animal kingdom. Their mandibles close at speeds up to 230 kilometers per hour, completing the motion in 64 to 130 microseconds. A human eye blink takes between 100 and 400 milliseconds. The ant closes its jaws 1,000 times faster than you blink. It also uses this mechanism to escape predators by striking its jaws against the ground and launching itself into the air, a weapon that doubles as a catapult. Ants bury their dead. Specialist workers called necrophores carry corpses from the nest and deposit them in dedicated sites. The signal that triggers this behavior is oleic acid, released during decomposition. Experimentally coating a living ant with this compound causes its nestmates to carry it to the cemetery, regardless of its protests. The dead ant scent overrides all behavioral signals to the contrary. The ant could be waving every leg. If it smells dead, it is treated as dead. Matabele ants retrieve their wounded from battle. After raids on termite mounds, injured workers emit distress signals and are carried home by healthy individuals. A 2017 study showed this behavior significantly increases survival rates and sustains overall colony strength. They do not leave their injured behind. Edward O. Wilson, twice a Pulitzer Prize winner, Harvard professor, and one of the most influential biologists of the 20th century, dedicated the central arc of his career to ants. His 1990 monograph, co-authored with Bert Hölderblur, received the Pulitzer Prize in nonfiction. It remains the only book about insects ever to receive that distinction. Wilson described insects as the little creatures who run the world. He was not speaking loosely. The Argentine ant, Linapithema humile, formed a super colony running 6,000 kilometers along the Mediterranean coastline from Italy to Spain. Every ant within it recognizes every other as kin. No aggression between members. This is one of the largest cooperative structures ever documented among animals, 6,000 kilometers, roughly the distance from one side of an ocean to the other. Without ants, the damage would cascade in ways most people cannot anticipate. Thousands of plant species depend on ants for seed dispersal. Remove the ants and the plants fail to reproduce, then the animals that feed on those plants lose their food source, then the predators that depend on those animals follow, and what remains is an ecosystem losing structural integrity layer by layer. This is not a world without mosquitoes, where most of us quietly suspect things might improve. This is the removal of a keystone holding the arch in place. If humans disappeared instead, the ants would benefit immediately. Forests would reclaim agricultural land, pesticides would fade, habitat would expand. We are, for them, an obstacle. They are, for us, infrastructure. A 2022 study in Proceedings of the Royal Society B found ants can be more effective than pesticides at protecting crops. Free, self-organizing, available around the clock, they have provided these services for 100 million years without billing anyone. We are systematically replacing them with chemistry and machines. Myrmecology, the scientific study of ants, produces thousands of new papers annually. Ants are used as model organisms for studying the evolution of altruism, the mechanisms of communication, the biology of aging, and the dynamics of collective intelligence. They are inexpensive to maintain, reproduce rapidly, and display the full spectrum of complex social behavior observable in mammals, compressed into bodies the size of punctuation marks. Keeping ant colonies at home has become a growing hobby worldwide. Glass and acrylic formicaria allow observers to watch a civilization in cross-section. Soldiers, builders, nurses, a queen, birth, death, resource management, territorial conflict, all of it visible and ongoing. Not an aquarium, a civilization under glass. Formic acid takes its name directly from the ant. In 1671, English naturalist John Ray first isolated it by distilling redwood ants. The compound is now used in leather processing, rubber production, and pharmaceutical manufacturing. The ant gave us the molecule before we knew what a molecule was. Ants survived the mass extinction 66 million years ago that ended the dinosaurs and erased 76% of all life on Earth. The hell ants did not make it, but other lineages did, and the aftermath of that catastrophe became the starting point for explosive diversification. Ecological niches vacated by the dominant species of the Cretaceous were filled in part by ants. The apocalypse was their opportunity. Several ant species are now listed as threatened by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Habitat destruction, pesticide exposure, climate disruption, invasion by competing species. Every hectare of forest converted to pavement or monoculture represents the loss of millions of ants and the ecosystem services they provide without charge: soil aeration, seed dispersal, pest control, decomposition. We have been firing them from the job they have held for 100 million years and replacing them with products that cost money, degrade the environment, and expire. Here is what we are left with: a creature that weighs less than a grain of sugar, that can carry 50 times its own weight above its head, that builds underground cities 8 meters deep, that wages war, takes prisoners, cultivates fungus, herds livestock, performs surgery, self-medicates, retrieves its wounded, mourns its dead, teaches its young, navigates by the stars, and has been doing all of this since before the first flower bloomed on Earth. 20 quadrillion of them, 2.5 million for every human alive, a collective biomass that outweighs every wild bird and wild mammal combined, and we crush them underfoot without looking down. The question the beginning of this video asked you to hold: what does it say about us that this creature, with no individual self-awareness, no central command, no concept of civilization, has independently arrived at war, agriculture, medicine, architecture, slavery, democracy, and collective intelligence across a timeline that makes our own history look like a rounding error? Maybe the answer is not that ants are surprisingly like us. Maybe the answer is that we are, in certain uncomfortable ways, not quite as original as we believed. If this reshaped the way you see the ground you walk on, leave a comment below with the fact that hits you hardest. And if you want to go deeper into the hidden intelligence of the animal world, the next video is already waiting for you.